microphones. Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are live and direct to the internet. So there's a book.
There's a book. We've been calling it All We Can Save in a Soft Shell.
Yes, the hardcover is a thing of the past. And on behalf of the All We Can Save project, thank you for being part of this celebration of the birthday of All We Can Save. And we want to begin by recognizing that we're gathered here tonight in Brooklyn on the ancestral lands of the Lenape and Canarsie people.
And we want to recognize the indigenous peoples of the past and the present who are connected to this land and all the lands on which people are gathered for this event tonight.
The warm reception, I think warm is like maybe too tepid of a temperature. The hot reception this book has received has really been like a complete, amazing surprise. No one saw it coming.
Especially not our publisher.
Just a bunch of women writing essays about climate. This will absolutely be a bestseller like everyone predicted it.
The hardcover came roaring into the world on September 22nd last year amidst dark days of the pandemic, the turmoil of election season, and on the tails of months of intense climate impacts. And it felt like it brought light and solidarity at a moment that people really needed it. And our hope is that the paperback can do some of the same thing, because we have communities again facing intense heat waves, floods, fires, droughts, all of it. And we are watching more and more people again this summer wake up to the transformation that is needed.
So many people want to be of use, or to be of use more deeply. And what we've seen over the last 10 months is that this book is actually a tool to help. And to date, some 50,000 copies of All We Can Save have reached readers. Hundreds. It's a lot of books. Don't worry, it's all on 100% recycled post-consumer fiber. Hundreds of All We Can Save reading circles have engaged in deep dialogue and community building, and educators are bringing the anthology to dozens of universities, from HBCUs to state colleges to Ivy Leagues.
We are also really over the moon that the city of Boulder selected this book for its One Book, One Boulder citywide reading program this year. The idea of an entire city, right? Delving into this collective wisdom is really incredible.
And we can't go any further without thanking our partners for tonight's event, to Patagonia for making the whole thing possible. Woo! Especially our co-host, Jenna Johnson, who you'll hear from shortly, and Sarah Swidler, who is our producer extraordinaire and a genuine sorceress of events. Thank you, Sarah.
Big thanks also to New Belgium Brewing, Shandon and Jane Walker for providing libations, and to Patagonia Provisions for nibbles for the in-person gatherings.
And we're also grateful to Fabiana Rodriguez, whose art has helped to create the visual vibe for this event. So if you're feeling some like good collage-y, nature-y vibes, thank Favi. And to everyone who helped make tonight happen, a total dream team.
Speaking of tonight is really about holding the truth of the moment that we're in and looking forward to what is still possible. We are joined by a group of women leading on climate in critical ways through arts and culture, policy, advocacy, education, organizing, research, and more. There are sadly 2 planned speakers who can only be here with us in spirit tonight. Patricia Smith and Sherry Mitchell are both tending family emergencies, so we are sending them our love.
For the rest of our speakers here tonight, we'll hear from them about the behind the scenes of their essays, about critical work that's underway, and we'll hold space to imagine the life-giving future that we're all working toward. We'll begin the program here in New York. It is in fact already begun. We'll hand it off to folks in LA midway through, and then we will come back here to wrap up, all on the same ride, thanks to the magic of our AV team.
So let's get into it. As you all know, poetry is a vital and soulful through line in this anthology, as are Madeline Jubilee Saito's beautiful comics. And poetry and art are continuing to be central as we grow the work of the All We Can Save project. So it felt like the right place to start the evening. And I'm going to read a poem that has been just a source of nourishment for me this summer, and that's Ada Limon's Dead Stars. Out here, there's a bowing even the trees are doing. Winter's icy hand at the back of all of us. Black bark, slick yellow leaves, a kind of stillness that feels so mute, it's almost in another year. I am a hearth of spiders these days, a nest of trying. We point out the stars that make Orion as we take the trash, the rolling containers, a song of suburban thunder. It's almost romantic as we adjust the waxy blue recycling bin until you say, man, we should really learn some new constellations. And it's true, we keep forgetting about Antlia, Centaurus, Draco, Lacerta, Hydra, Lyra, Lynx. But mostly, we're forgetting we're dead stars too. My mouth is full of dust, and I wish to reclaim the rising, to lean in the spotlight of streetlight with you toward what's larger within us, toward how we were born. Look, we are not unspectacular things. We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder? What if we stood up with our synapses and flesh and said no, no to the rising tides, stood for the many mute mouths of the sea, of the land? What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth? If we declared a clean night, if we stopped being terrified, if we launched our demands into the sky, made ourselves so big, people could point to us with the arrows they make in their minds, rolling their trash bins out after all of this is over. I'll leave it with you.
Thank you, Catherine. I would like to call our first very special guest to the stage. Dr. Kate Marvel, please join me up here. This is Dr. Kate Marvel. She is a NASA climate scientist and a writer whose claim to fame is living around the corner from me in Brooklyn. Is your mic on? Is it happening? Just try to talk. Mm-mm.
Hello? Does this work now?
Nope. I'm going to ask you a question and then I'm going to pass you this mic. So Kate has a doctorate in astrophysics, so she knows that Earth is quantitatively the best place in the entire universe. And my first question for you, Kate, is what do you wish that people understood about climate science?
All of it. I feel like we would be in a much better position if people did. But something that I wish people understood is that climate science is still science, right? So I go to parties. I say I go to parties. I used to go to parties in the before times, and people would say, oh, you must be so depressed all the time, or why aren't you sadder? And like that's weird, but also I think, yeah, a little rude. But climate science is still science, and that means that there is so much that we can find out. There's so much left to learn, and that's so lovely because, as you pointed out, I have a PhD in astrophysics, so I know that space really sucks. It wants to kill us. And this planet is the only planet that we know of with life. And it's the only planet that we know of with a water ocean and an atmosphere we can breathe and creatures living on the land. And that's amazing.
Can we get that other mic? Oh, this one works now?
Does this work now? Oh, amazing. Yes.
Problem solution. So it's really too bad I didn't have the mic so I could make a joke about billionaires in space right then, but I think we all... So I think since this is a celebration of a book, I would love you to read a passage from your essay for us all to enjoy.
All right. Okay. So this is from the essay, A Handful of Dust.
By Dr. Kate Marvel.
I mean, that would be weird if it was by somebody else, but everything is connected and everything is complicated. We do not live on a planet governed by a single variable. The crops that feed us, the reservoirs that slake our thirst, and the rivers that transport our goods depend on the amount and timing of rainfall. The speed and direction of prevailing winds dictate everything from the position of our wind turbines to the routes taken by transatlantic jets. The planet is connected to itself in strange and surprising ways, and we still have only a limited understanding of these intricate links. The climate, we are told, is always changing. We know this. Volcanic eruptions cancel summers and freeze early season fruit on the vine. The sun's output varies slightly. Wobbles in the Earth's orbit precipitate ice ages and deglaciations. The changes that have occurred before, Tambora, Pinatubo, the glaciers that covered most of Europe and North America 20,000 years ago, show the fragility of the planet and its capacity for change. These changes are different from the changes we are now affecting, but they tell us things, and we live with their consequences even now. There were once forests in the Sahara, if not quite the Amazon, still lush and tropical, clustered around the largest freshwater lake on the planet at the time. The lake is mostly gone now, vanished in the span of a few hundred years. In its place, there is nothing but dust. It is dry because the planet wobbled slightly in its orbit, weakening the monsoon rains in the west of Africa. The plants sucked the moisture from the soil. It was not replaced. They died, and no more moisture entered the atmosphere, a vicious cycle of dying and drying that led to the depopulated desert we know today. The climate changed. It was not the fault of humans. But the existence of past climate change does not mean we are not responsible for it this time. There have always been gentle and natural deaths. This does not make murder impossible.
So it would be really great if we didn't murder the planet. What were you thinking when you were writing this? So Kate's essay is about geoengineering, and it sort of gets into all of these different moral issues as well as the science. What were you thinking when you were writing about it?
What were you thinking?
What were you thinking? I mean, we were like, this is great, we'll publish it, but what?
I think a lot about the interconnectedness of the planet. And the reason I'm so cautious about geoengineering solutions, suggestions that we can lower the temperature by just blocking the sun, is that doesn't really recognize the amazing interconnectedness of everything. The fact that the land is connected to the ocean, which is connected to the atmosphere, which is connected to the ice sheets. And we're doing an unprecedented experiment on this planet, and there's no control group. So we are currently geoengineering the planet by emitting greenhouse gases and changing the temperature. So I was thinking about the consequences of the experiment that we're currently doing and the consequences of experiments that we might choose to do in the future.
So Kate has this amazing capacity to write about science, but also somehow like punch you in the gut. And the last sentence of her essay is kind of a spoiler if you haven't read the book yet, you know. That we'll have, if we go through with all this geoengineering, we'll have spectacular sunsets, but during the day, the light will seem weak and white and hazy because this is the trade-off. If we do this, the sky will never be as blue again. So the stakes are kind of high for what humans decide to do. And I know that you and I both get asked about that a lot, about like the feelings side of that, which is like something I often don't feel prepared to do as someone who like went to get a PhD in science, then constantly asked all day, like, how do I feel and what gives me hope? And I hate that question, so I will not ask it to you. Because I know that you also don't think it's helpful, but what question do you feel like we should be asking ourselves instead in this moment?
I feel like as one of the scientists who does these future climate projections, and this goes back to your first question, I think, one of the things that I want people to understand is that the apocalypse is optional. We don't have to experience devastating climate change. And there's a lot that we don't understand about this planet. That's why I still have a job. But the biggest wild card is what humans do. And I think once you understand that everything is going to change one way or the other, either it's going to change because the climate is going to change and turn the planet into something we don't recognize, or it's going to change because we solve the problem, we restructure our societies, but we don't have the choice to not change. And once you recognize that, then you can start asking yourself what kind of futures you would like to see. And so I think a much better question than do you have hope is what do you want?
And hopefully what are you willing to do to make it happen?
Exactly.
So I know you think and write and crunch numbers around what the future could be in various scenarios, climate models and projections. And we talk about what's ahead for the planet, but what is ahead for the field of climate science? What's on the horizon as far as our burgeoning understanding?
So there's a lot that we do know about the planet. We don't disagree that greenhouse gases are warming the planet or that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. But there's a lot of uncertainty in the science. There's a lot of things we don't understand about how the planet reacts when you kick it this hard. So I have recently gotten kind of obsessed with merging present observations from satellites and past records of climates that existed before. So an example of that, last year I wrote a paper with some colleagues where we looked at current drought patterns and we put them in context with past droughts. And we have a really amazing understanding of past drought conditions that goes back to 1500, 800, the beginning of the Common Era even. So it really stretches back throughout history. And we get that from looking at tree rings. When it's a wet, moist year, trees grow like crazy. They have nice big fat rings. When it's a dry year, they're thin. And that can give you an understanding of droughts that we've experienced before. So you can find out things like the American West is now in what we call a mega drought. But it's actually not the worst mega drought experienced by the United States. Those happened naturally in the year 1200 or so, the Middle Ages. And we know from the archaeological evidence that those megadroughts were associated with collapses of civilizations and large-scale migrations. So for me, that was very sobering because it really weaves together the past climate, the climate we're experiencing right now, and I think really reinforces that climate change is not just a scientific problem. Climate change is a problem for all of us, and it's not just for scientists to solve it.
When you were starting out that answer, it reminded me of actually how Catherine and I opened the book with the story of Eunice Newton Foote, who was doing experiments in 1856 in her backyard and determined that carbon dioxide would in fact lead to planetary warming if it accumulated in the atmosphere. And so Catherine liked to say, well, like Eunice tried to warn us. And she also, first before any men scientists who have later been given credit for discovering the greenhouse effect and global warming. And she also signed the Seneca Falls Declaration for Women's Rights. So we like to think of her as the first climate feminist and sort of a matriarch of the work that we're doing now. So what are you working on next? What's coming up for you? The big questions about this planet or otherwise that you are asking?
I am very interested in how life on the planet will respond to climate change. So people, obviously, but also plants. I'm interested in how the surface of the land will respond as the land gets drier and hotter. That's a really interesting scientific question. It's also a potential very big wild card for the future of the carbon cycle. I do want to point out, I think this is a very fun fact. The guy who ended up getting credit for Eunice Newton Foote's discovery was...
The Irish dude, John Tyndall?
Mm-hmm. He was murdered by his wife. I just feel like that was an important fact to inject into this discussion.
I did not know that part. Noted, and everyone, I guess, else take note. So maybe we could close with just you sharing one other thing that people have really remarked on from your essay, which is the story of how Mary Shelley's life interacts with climate change.
So as a scientist and a former teenage girl, I'm obsessed with Mary Shelley because when she was a teenage girl, she went on vacation with a bunch of insufferable men. And the year she went on vacation was known as the year without a summer, because Mount Tambora in Indonesia blew up, smeared so much gas and dust in the atmosphere that it blocked enough sunlight to lower the temperature, mess with rainfall patterns, and lead to this year without a summer. So poor Mary Shelley went on vacation to Switzerland and got trapped inside with the world's most pretentious men. Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and a bunch of romantic poets. And to pass the time, they challenged each other to tell ghost stories. So one of them told the story that ended up evolving into Dracula. And Lord Byron told a story, who cares what he said? And then Mary Shelley ended up telling a story which became Frankenstein, which is the story we think of when we think of scientific hubris and scientists getting things wrong. So the story of Frankenstein really arises, it's really a climate story because it came from short-term climate change.
And now you know. Thank you, Kate, for sharing all of this wonderful insights with us. You've got the behind the scenes of Kate's essay. And now we're actually going to pass the mic over to the crew in LA and to the hosts there, Jenna Johnson. Jenna is the head of Patagonia Inc., Patagonia's apparel and equipment business. And she focuses on creating pathways to action for global customers through responsible product engagement, community activism, and progress in saving our home planet. Thank you, Jenna. Take it away.
Hello, everyone from LA. Thank you, Ayanna, and thank you, Catherine. and hello to everyone. We're gathered here with a really great community here in LA, and want to just acknowledge that we're on the ancestral lands of the Tungva people, and we want to recognize and honor that this is Indigenous land. To kick things off here in LA, I'd like to read one of my favorite poems from the anthology. I deeply connect with this poem. Specifically, I have the great honor of working with exceptional community of Patagonia, but all of us are gathered here in LA and in all the communities here. I know that this poem is a reflection of all of us. So I just want to say I'm thrilled to be with you here today and to celebrate the many ripples that all we can save has already made and the waves to come. So the poem that I'm going to read is To Be of Use by Margaret Piercy. The people I love best jump into their work head first, without dallowing in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. And now I'm delighted here in LA to introduce two amazing California-based climate leaders. Fabiana Rodriguez is an award-winning artist, a cultural strategist, and president of the Center for Cultural Power, a national organization investing in artists as agents of social change. Excited to have you here, Fabiana. And Dr. Leah Cardamon-Stokes is a professor at the University of California at Santa Barbara, right where I live, and is a policy expert on energy and climate change. She's the author of the book Short Circuiting Policy and co-host of A Matter of Degrees. I'll let you two take it away. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, hello, and hello to New York City from the other coast.
Okay, thank you so much, Jenna, for the very generous introduction. And Favi and I just met, but she's awesome. And it's been so cool to be part of this book with so many fabulous women all across the country. Yeah. But it's really cool to meet Favi in person. So we're going to start out with reading some passages of one another's essays to one another, give you a sense of this fabulous book if you haven't read it yet. And so I'm going to read a passage from Harnessing Cultural Power. And it is a letter, so to speak, a letter to many people, perhaps all of you, actually, to the leaders, organizers, and funders of the climate movement. Culture is power. The music we listen to, the social media we consume, the food we eat, the movies and television shows we watch. These all inform our values, behaviors, and worldviews. Culture is in a constant battle for our imagination. It is our most powerful tool to inspire the social change these times demand. Current global events, from pandemics to massive wildfires, which happening right now, demonstrate how interconnected and interdependent we are as human beings with one another and with Earth. As the old narrative of capitalism reveals its devastating failures, we urgently need more compelling and relatable stories that show us what a just, sustainable, and healthy world can look like. The old myths will die when we can replace them with new ones. We need our storytellers, a mighty force, to help us shift our mythology and imagine a future where together we strive with nature. That is the power we must harness if we are able to find our way out of the climate crisis. We must build a cultural strategy for the climate movement. So Fabiana, this is a great essay. I listened to the audiobook, which I love, highly recommend the audiobook, and it was read by
America Ferrera.
Fancy lady, America
Yes.
Ferrera. Very cool. And I was just wondering, when you wrote this essay about how we need more climate stories, how you watch television and there's like no climate stories in television, right. And we watch our lives and there's a lot of climate stories in our lives. And so what were you thinking when you wrote this essay? What did you want to get across?
Yes. Well, we all know, whether it's thinking about that song that really transformed us or that book or that film, like the power of culture is that it speaks to our emotions and it shows us what's possible. And of course, culture can be used against us, as we saw with the last administration, that when you begin to put out a story of hate very rapidly, stories get normalized. And so as an artist and as a creative, I've always felt that a lot of the way we approach climate is here, and it's not here. And in order for it to really, for us to be moved and for people to also get out of the doom and imagine what's possible, we need stories. We need to actually an entire different culture of how we relate to energy. So
yes, that's a key word for me.
Yes, I know.
So I think that's my cue to hand the book to you.
Okay, great. So Leah, I want to read something from your essay as well. And Leah's essay is called A Field Guide for Transformation. And it opens with a quote by Rainer Maria Rilke. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I was more than a decade into being an environmental activist when I saw it. Energy. It was everywhere. In the fuel for our cars, in the fertilizer for our food, in the plastics at the grocery store, in the electricity lighting our homes. We were relying on fossil fuels for everything. Once I learned to see them, I could find fossil fuels wherever I looked, and it wasn't hard to see their harm either. Coal, oil, and gas make people sick, pump pollution into our air and water, and push up carbon concentrations in the atmosphere, driving dangerous weather. It took me a long time to understand that government policy has created this climate crisis. Our politicians subsidize fossil fuels while blocking clean energy. We need to turn this around. If we could just stop digging up fossil fuels, I thought we might stand a chance. Yes. So Leah, what was on your mind when you wrote this?
Well, I think what's still on my mind, very much so, which is that we have to radically transform our economy. Now would be great. A decade ago would have been fantastic. But if we can't do that in the next decade, let's say, or by 2035 is a timeline that I'm very focused on right now. And as you know, there is a bill in Congress right now that's slowly developing through the budget reconciliation process, which will create an opportunity to change this dynamic where we stop subsidizing fossil fuels and we start investing in clean energy jobs, in things like electric vehicles, heat pumps, induction stoves, of course, wind and solar, all these technologies that we have today, but we need to get into people's homes, into our electricity system, into our transportation system. And that's really what I'm extremely focused on right now. And I partially wrote this essay to give people a sense of my own trajectory and help them find their way into the movement.
Yes.
Because as you know, Fabiana, if we were asked a question today, it would be, what can I do? And so my essay was trying to answer that question of what people can do. And there's really so much you can do. Lord knows I have too much to do. So if you would like some things to do, I could give you some stuff.
Yes.
So Fabiana, we just heard an essay from Jenna. A poem from Jenna, which was fantastic about, people who are worker bees and who are harnessing their energy. And, I was wondering, per this theme that's in my essay too, of how can I be of use in climate work? How do you see your role in that ecosystem? You have such a cool organization. I'd love for you to explain to people what it is a little bit and talk about, it's kind of a different way of thinking about climate work, because so much of us think in more of the wonky ways or the science ways, but you have a really cool role. So what's your role in this ecosystem of the climate movement?
Yeah, well, my role is really understanding the story of how we got here. And we have to remember that our relationship to energy is really a product of a colonial white supremacist system that has exploited other bodies, not just human bodies, but earth bodies, for the benefit of very few. And there is this worldview, it's an extractive worldview. And I love that Greta Thunberg, she talks about fairy tales of endless consumption, that our relationship to nature and our relationship to energy is all based on a myth that there is endless, that it's here forever, and that is a lie. And so if we can transform the story and rebuild our relationship to nature, right, and to move away from extraction and domination, which is the story of the world right now. The world is a patriarchal, white supremacist, colonial system that has continued to just extract. And if we can transform that, we have to help folks look at a different kind of reality, right? And just like, you had Wakanda in Black Panther, we can use the tools of fantasy and comedy and futurism to help inspire our hearts, because right now the doom and gloom is overwhelming. And how do we imagine a future with solar, right? If we're watching movies where everyone's in their car and, they're racing and cars are status, what's up with EVs? Like, how do we actually normalize solar power? How do we normalize clean energy in a way where people are like, oil is nasty, it's the past, it's like the old shit. And instead, the future, we got to get with the future. And I feel like also to tell a story about climate change is to tell a story about racial justice, because in reality, those who are most affected are Black, Brown, Indigenous people. And a lot of times when we look at like climate stuff, right, or who are the climate spokespeople, whether it's our friend Leonardo DiCaprio, or we got movies like Snowpiercer.
That's your friend, eh?
Yeah, well, he's all of our friend. He's done good stuff. But that's who's holding down climate. Like, that's who you think about. And, when I think about climate change, I want to think about Beyonce and Lizzo, and I want to hear songs that are telling the polluters to go away. And we need to normalize it and feel it in our hearts. And that's the work that I do. And I get to work with a lot of musicians and actors and artists. And I think that often in our climate movement, we're like, oh yeah, art, that's cute. But in reality, we really need art. We really need culture. We need TV shows. We need all that. And it's going to happen when we also change who's talking about it. We got to pass the mic to, BIPOC creators who have actually lived with climate impacts for their whole lives. So that's the work I get to do. And, this book is culture. Like, the fact that we got to get our voices together and we make an object, we make something that helps touch people beyond our reports and our science data. We get to make stuff. And I think that's the work that I do. And I get to see, where do we speak to people the best? Is it through comedy? Is it through music? So I get to do fun stuff.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to Kendra Pierre-Lewis's essay in this book, which is all about Wakanda, actually, and how we can learn from Wakanda about climate change. So she's kind of doing that work that you're talking about. Totally. I think that's really great. And it's really cool. I remember when Catherine and Ayana asked me if I would be part of it, I said, well, we need more, Latinas in this book too. And they're like, oh, don't you worry. We're all about that. And so they're like,
I love it.
You're preaching to the choir here, sister. And I was like, okay, cool. So they really intentionally created a very diverse group of people who are part of this book. We're not just women. Oh, yeah. It's a lot of people of color as well in this book.
Totally. So, Leah, it's a real critical season for climate policy. And that's, of course, the focus of your work. So tell us what's at stake right now.
A lot. This is why I work constantly right now. You can ask my husband. He's slightly annoyed with the amount of work I'm doing. So right now what's happening in Congress is two things. We have what's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework. You might have heard of this. This was negotiated over the last several months and has certainly been annoyingly running down the clock. It includes some things. We don't exactly know what's in there, but some good things are in there, like public transit investments in cleaning up drinking water. But it's important to note that those investments are actually very small compared to what President Biden proposed at the end of March in his American Jobs Plan. So that's nice that they want to do some stuff on public transit or clean drinking water. But for example, on the clean drinking water piece, I think it's about 1/10 of what President Biden called for. And President Biden wants to remove lead pipes from all the corners of the United States, which is really important for environmental justice. And that's only 1/10 of the problem. And I recently wrote an essay where I said, you can't solve 1/10 of the climate crisis and call it a success. That's not how climate change works. You actually have to go at the scale of the crisis. So the good news is there's another process in Congress playing out right now, which is the budget reconciliation process. Okay, you may be glazing over, I know. But this is basically a process where we only need 50 votes. We have 50 votes in the Senate, you may recall. And that process, right now we know it's going to be $3.5 trillion at least that they spend on it. And it's going to include really important climate provisions like the Civilian Climate Corps, the Clean Electricity Standard, my firstborn child, I suppose, and the tax credits for renewables and many other things. So it's a really important bill. And if you feel like, damn, I really want that bill to pass, Leah is saying it's cool. Well, guess what, my friends? There is a website. It is called climate.com. And I know there's several hundred of you on the internet right now. So you're on a browser. So I want you to open up a new tab. That's Command T. Okay? I want you to go climate.com. And I want you to open that up. What you're going to find is a phone number. Okay? And it's also going to give you a script. And you can call that phone number and it's going to patch you through to your senators. And then you're going to call them and tell them you want all this cool environmental justice, climate action, job creation, etc. Okay, now all of you need to do this because that would be awesome. And then you need to tell several of your friends about it. So when you ask me, what can I do? I've just told you what you can do. Now, I know you're listening to this fabulous event, so you may not do it right now. Do it tonight. By the time you call, you're just going to get voicemail anyway, so you don't have to stress about anybody picking up the phone. So you just leave a voicemail for your senators. It's very easy, okay? And then all of you chilling in front of me right here, when you get home tonight, I want you to go to call4climate.com. I want to see a really big spike in the numbers of phone calls, my friends, because I get that data, all right? So that's my ask for you, and that's the little thing you can do that's a big thing. Because I'll tell you, Senate offices don't get a lot of phone calls. If you call them, they will notice. And we give you everything you need. You don't need to get a PhD. You just read the website. You just call. You leave a voicemail. Very easy. So those are the stakes, and that's how you can pitch in, and it will make a difference. So please do it. Thank you.
Yes.
So, Fabiana, I got us a little wonky there.
I love wonky.
But a little activisty too, so that was good. Now I need you to plug your organization. I don't even feel like you told us the name of it.
Okay.
So plug your organization. It's very cool, and tell us what cultural strategy is about and how it's going to be part of the climate movement.
Great. Okay. My organization is the Center for Cultural Power, and it's about just that we need to build cultural power. And you know, as a woman of color, I know that we live in a very white, male-centric, ableist culture. And we have to transform that. And so the fight for climate is actually deeply connected for the fight for racial justice and gender justice, because just as we see the way in which the Black Lives Matter movements helps illuminate something that has been happening for decades, and it helps propel action. You have movements to defund the police. You also have an awareness of how climate is disproportionately affecting people of color. And so whether it's, the young people, the way they're using theater, how they roll up in offices of Congress with all their little props, you know that their strategy is often designed by people who work in theater, right? Like, how do you stand with the right props, have the right visual imagery? Or we saw the video of the Green New Deal that AOC did with the artist Molly Crabapple. That is the hottest piece of pop culture we have right now on the Green New Deal. We need even more than that, but that's what we got. And you have the beginnings of even the way that we're talking about climate. You have to include the experiences of people of color. So for example, I was just listening to The Daily, listening to the show about Portland and the heat waves. And I don't know if y'all knew, but in the white communities, they were at 98. And in the black and brown communities, they were at 120 because of land use policies. And so I think it's really important when we talk about climate, you know, it's not about just polar bears and rising sea level. It's about policies that were implemented against communities of color. Our communities are dirtier, they're warmer, and we are going to be dramatically affected. And so we need to tell stories that show us that. You know, I love that earlier we were talking about the constellations. Art and stories is like when you see a story, you see a star. And we need more stories because the more stars you see, they begin to connect the dots and you see a constellation. And that is a moment of narrative change. And so as we're experiencing, you know, whether it's the fires and we get to talk about the prisoners, the mostly black and brown men who have to fight fires for slave wages, right? This is all how it's connected. You know, we have to continue putting the pressure, especially on pop culture. You know, Hollywood does an awful job on climate stories. And that's largely because this is still an industry controlled by over 95% white men. And, you know, they need to step away and let women of color, Black women, Indigenous people lead in order for us to have compelling stories. So that's the kind of work I'm doing now. We're definitely in a turning point, and that's largely because there is a racial justice movement. And when we become aware of the disparities of race, the disparities on climate get even clearer. So, Leah, let's see. You are a You are a podcast host now.
Yes.
And I love that you're doing storytelling work because it's exactly what we're talking about. How is this storytelling work complementing your research and policy work?
Yeah, so I host a podcast with this lady named Catherine Wilkinson. I think she also might have a PhD. You may have heard of her. I think she might be in New York right now. I don't know. She's wonderful, and it's called A Matter of Degrees, and it's stories for the climate curious. That's our tagline. So it's storytelling. And one of the things we do is we take stories from our own sort of work in climate policy and wonky stuff, and we make them more compelling for people by adding, you know, narrative and music and all these emotional touch points that are way more powerful than academic work. So I wrote this academic book. It did very well for an academic book, but let me assure you that compared to my podcast, my academic book is not read by that many people. So what we've done is redo the academic stories in a podcast form. So we, for example, our most popular episode is called The Darth Vader of Electric Utilities. And it's based on a story from Arizona that I researched for my book of this utility fighting solar. And we have this amazing woman who I think is currently running for Attorney General of Arizona, Chris Mays. Love her, look her up. And she tells us about how this utility was so evil and it was like Darth Vader. Well, that's way more fun than my academic book. It's true. Yeah. So stories can reach a lot more people. And one of the really important things we do on this podcast is, as we would say, pass the mic. So I think 60% of our guests have been women, 40% have been people of color, and we have had guest co-hosts who are Indigenous, Black. We're having a Latina guest co-host this season, and we really try to tell those stories of people in the climate movement who are people of color as well. So I think that comes to the end of our wonderful talking away, unless you want to say something.
I do want to tell folks something, which is that you don't have to be an artist to be a storyteller. And right now, we are at a time because of the pandemic where people are absorbing stories through social media like we've never seen before. So our ability to reach others is very high, and that's because people are on digital communication tools. I really encourage folks to think about addressing the climate crisis as also rebuilding our relationship to nature, whether that is having gardens in your home, whether that's, going into sacred lands and understanding what it is understanding this world that we live in, and really becoming ambassadors for that and telling your story. What is your relationship to our beautiful home? And what are you doing? Because I think that we are in such hard times that not only do we need to tell stories of our relationship to nature, but we also need to talk about how we're going to cope together, how we're going to deal, and how we're going to, and that happens when we can, tune into nature and really speak from our hearts. And so I really encourage everyone to tap into your own storytelling skills, and to create a story really means to get out of here and speak from your heart. And if folks, my organization is on Instagram. I encourage folks to follow us. We are at Culture Strike, and one of our most popular projects is called Climate Woke, #Climate Woke, and that's about all of us getting more woke on climate so that we are able to really fight for our beautiful planet.
So your action items are Climate Woke and callforclimate.com. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm handing it back to Jenna.
Thank you, Fabiana and Leah. Thank you for your contributions and your passion for all that we can do. It's certainly super inspiring. So we're here in LA and we've seen New York, but there's a lot of mini watch parties happening all over the place tonight. So thank you first and foremost to everyone who is tuning in. We want to give a special shout out to our official watch parties that are in Atlanta and in St. Paul. So first, I think let's go over to Atlanta. Hello, Atlanta.
And they will have our sound on, so we'll just say, hey.
Hello, there's Atlanta hanging out, joining us. There's a crew. That crew is at Interface, the global flooring manufacturer with a mission to reverse climate warming. They call it Climate Take Back. And they're joining us from their base camp headquarters. It sounds like every week since All We Can Save came out, Interface has been giving out copies to their customers who attend their Carbon Love and Learn. We're thrilled that they're with us tonight for the next stage of this book's journey. Awesome. And next, we're going to head over and say hello to Twin Cities. In the Twin Cities, there's a crew, including some friends from the climate solutions nonprofit Project Drawdown. They're gathered at the Science Museum of Minnesota. Excited to have them tuning in with us this evening. The Science Museum of Minnesota is one of the most visited and trusted museums in the state. There they are. Hello, everyone in the Twin Cities. Right now, they're running an Action for Earth initiative and raising a bold voice in the climate conservation. Thank you to all of you for the work that you do and for being incredible champions of All We Can Save. Really, really appreciate it. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it back over to Ayanna and Catherine over in Brooklyn.
The miracles of technology.
I tell you.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Leah and Favi and watch parties. I am sort of mesmerized by this coast-to-coast situation we have going. I am now really honored to introduce two leaders who Ayanna and I deeply admire as vanguards and matriarchs in climate work. Elizabeth Yampier is an internationally recognized Puerto Rican environmental and climate justice leader. She is co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance and executive director of Uprose, right here, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. And Heather McTier-Toney is a fellow Southerner, a Mississippi Delta native, climate justice liaison at Environmental Defense Fund, senior advisor to Mom's Clean Air Force, and former regional administrator of the EPA under Obama. She was the first woman and first African-American mayor of Greenville, Mississippi. So you all are in for a treat. And I wanted to start this conversation with the quote of yours, Elizabeth, that's in All We Can Save, that is really powerful. And I would love for you to read it and then expand for us a little bit on why this is so important, what you talk about in this quote.
Thank you. And I share to all my people, and kibaye to all the members of our community that passed on with the ancestors because of COVID. So leaderful means there is enough room for all of us. Seeing everyone roll in together is much more powerful than having one or two people speak for everyone. Being intergenerationally leaderful also generates the best ideas and solutions. We need to do this together, and we can do it lovingly. Thanks.
Yeah. You were sharing earlier with me about how important both of these pieces, leaderful and intergenerational, are. Would you speak to that?
So we often think that the solution to addressing climate change is to come in with tech fixes, infrastructure, and we disregard just relationships. And I believe that if we don't focus on addressing issues of racial justice and equity, if people continue to run to the front and extract and pick our brains, if we're not able to create leaderful communities, that we will fail. Leaderful means that you share power and resources. Leaderful means that everyone is at the table, not that we get included, but we also exercise leadership, because I think sometimes people invite us to the table so that they can satisfy their need for Black and brown quotient on that table so that they can deal with their own personal guilt. Leaderful means that because we are the global majority, because we are descendants of enslavement and colonialization, the very things that gave birth to climate change, leaderful means that frontline leadership is honored, respected, invested in, lifted, and that it is not supplanted, it is not extricated. And so leaderful means checking privilege and sharing that power. And nothing is more exciting about all the possibilities and all the possibilities of the things that we've done, because the climate justice movement is a leaderful movement. It's led by women of color, by Black, Indigenous women of color. There is one of everything. We're like sancocho, right? Delicious and really good, right? And it shows what's possible when people are able to work with each other as allies, share resources, share information, and share power. I had COVID last March, and I was out for 3 weeks. And I just want to share this quickly. I'm someone who works like it's climate change. Like, I work 24/7. I could be in ICU, and I will be putting on makeup and sending out an email. But COVID took me out. And in that time, there were people who stepped in and stepped up and shared power and resources. And I was able to take time to heal and to get better because we were leaderful. There were so many of us holding this space. The idea of being leaderful also rejects old power models that are patriarchal, where you've got one iconic leader, often one that has been picked for you. Climate change is demanding a different kind of construct, a different kind of power model. It's demanding that we be leaderful and intergenerational. I just want to say something quickly about that since Greta was mentioned. The idea of young people leading is as extractive and capitalist as everything else. We come from traditions where we honor our elders and we work intergenerationally. I can read the room politically, and young people can teach me about infrastructure, policy, apps that are new, all kinds of things that are necessary for my evolution and for me to be a good organizer. They have to be at the table, And we need to be able to share power across the table so that they don't take 20 years to learn what it took us a minute to learn. We don't have time for them to learn. We have to be nimble. I do want to say that there hasn't been a movement in this country that wasn't led by young people of color. And I sometimes get very upset about how they're erased. They have been leading in the environmental justice movement for more than 20 years. They lead in the climate justice movement. We stand on the shoulders of the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the American Indian movement, the Brown Berets, every single movement that gave life to us and our ability to fight back was led by young people of color. So it is not new. It is part of the legacy. It's a continuum of leadership. And so we have to be both intergenerational and leaderful if we're going to be able to survive climate change.
Thank you.
And I think one of the causes for courage in this moment is that the we feels like it's getting bigger and bigger every day. And I know this has been really important for you, Heather, in your work too. What do you think is needed to help broad and diverse climate leadership continue to rise and have the resources and platforms that are needed?
So I think part of it is us opening our eyes and realizing that the we has been there the whole time. The we has been a part of the work. The we has been doing the work in a lot of respects that we just haven't acknowledged. And so part of the broadening of these circles is the recognition and honor of people who have actually been not only impacted and victimized by this work, but that have culturally competent solutions that we need to acknowledge. And so sharing this space, having these conversations, and this word has been used quite often, but I really think it should be used even more, normalizing the conversation with everybody and everything. We often think of climate change as one of these boxes of social justice issues. We're dealing with climate change, police brutality, health inequities, when in reality, climate is the table that all the boxes sit on top of. And so if we realize climate and the climate crisis in that way, we realize that it undergirds every single thing that happens. We were talking earlier, and I was listening about, the impacts of what's happening. I think Fabia just said about the disparate temperatures and degrees between Black and white communities. Well, that's based upon the racist houses policies of the 1950s and 60s, which established by our government and put Black and brown people into places where right now you have concrete areas that if you look at the temperature just across the top, it's much hotter than in spaces where we have non-impervious surfaces. That's not because we wanted to be there. That's because when my grandfather came back from World War II and got that money that all of the people got, his white colleagues could go and buy a house on one side, and he had to go to the west side of Baltimore because that's where Black folks could buy houses. So it's really digging into those conversations and realizing that climate change as we see it right now really is this table, and all the social justice things sit on top of it.
And you write about this really beautifully in your essay in the book, title we love, Collards Are Just as Good as Kale. I think someone made you a t-shirt, right?
One of my friends, she sure did make me a t-shirt, and I'm Southern, so yes, collard greens are a staple in my household.
Would you read a passage from your piece?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Caring about climate change is not a bougie Black thing. Who exactly do you think is on the front lines every single day, fighting to keep our communities safe from industries, polluters, and those seeking to harm our kids? Who do you think is fighting that filthy incinerator at the end of the neighborhood block, that coal ash pile on the way to work, or that cement plant next door to the church? Who do you think has to take care of children who are made sick on their own playgrounds but can't afford to rush to emergency rooms? We live in pollution, play around it, work for it, and pray against it. Hell, we even sing about it. Black women are everyday environmentalists. We are climate leaders. We just don't get the headlines too often. Rarely do we see or hear Black voices as part of national conversations about Black climate policy, the green economy, or clean energy. Even though 57% of Black Americans are concerned or alarmed about climate change compared to 49% of white folks. We're relegated to providing an official comment on environmental justice issues like the water crisis in Flint, or we're the faces in the photos when candidates need to show that they're inclusive. Fortunately, this is slowly changing as more and more women of color step loudly up to the table and make their expertise known in climate justice and culturally competent solution-based thinking.
I'm curious, Elizabeth, how that passage resonates for you.
That's my life. That's my life in poetry. Thank you, sister, for that. Yeah, it resonates. I was saying to you earlier that I work like it's climate change, right? 24/7. This is a life. It's not a job. I grew up in EJ communities. My family has endured all of the health impacts of having to grow up as in a legacy of that. I'm Puerto Rican, which means that Hurricane Maria and coming from an island where there are 23 super funds and the United States has just had its way with the island is really a model of climate injustice. So we come to the work of environmental racism from our own personal lived experience, from having been exposed to all the toxics and toxicants that have been affecting our health. It's a legacy. It didn't just start in the 70s. It goes back, I think. You're in Brooklyn. You're in the BK. It goes back, I think, to the slave quarters when our descendants, where our ancestors had access to the worst living conditions, the worst health care, the worst food. And then when they were freed, were surrounded by petrochemical industries like people in Port Arthur, Texas and Houston. And the siting that happens in all of our communities, whether it's in the South Bronx or right here in Brooklyn. And so we have been fighting, not because we care about trees, but because the trees are the lungs of the community and they make them it makes it easier for us to breathe. We started fighting for environmental justice because we were literally fighting for the right to breathe. And so it completely resonates, and we've had to be generalists. We have to know about everything from energy democracy to brownfield remediation to how do you get open space, how do you measure air quality, NOx, SOx, and PM 2.5. With few resources, we have had to become experts in all of it. But the good news is that we have been kicking ass, right? There is, the badassery of the environmental justice movement, our fingerprints are all over every single piece of legislation, both statewide, like the CLCPA, the most aggressive legislation on climate change in the country, to the Thrive Act, the Green New Deal. Every single piece of legislation that's coming out has the fingerprints of Black, Indigenous, and women of color all over it. Here in Sunset Park, I could talk about that later, but I wanna let you know. Do now? Yes. Sunset Park, just in the year of COVID alone, where it had knocked us out, where we lost loved ones. And that year alone, we launched the first community-owned solar cooperative in the state, because wealth has to be passed on to our people. We defeated industry cities rezoning and fought for the green reindustrialization of the industrial waterfront because we thought that maybe building for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience was more important than avocado toast. We then, because we had started fighting for an industrial waterfront that would address future climate needs in 1998, we're able to bring a $200 million investment for offshore wind in South Brooklyn. This being led by frontline communities. And then last week we met with the Secretary of Energy to encourage her to invest in frontline communities, not to give us benefits because they want to just sort of throw money at us so that they can manage our expectations, but invest in infrastructure. So we have been busy in just the 1.5 years. Those are some of the big victories that I think that we didn't stop to really process how much time, effort, and sacrifice went into creating that. The creativity that was involved in organizing, planning, having a response to something like Industry City, that we created this 88-page plan called The Grid. And it really is looking at the significant maritime areas in New York City, the areas that have played a role in killing our peoples, those areas that have been contributing, like peaker plants and all of those extractive polluting industries that have been killing us for a minute, to think about how do we turn those into green jobs? How do we make sure that by turning into green jobs, we are addressing health, we are addressing racial justice, we are preventing the massive displacement of our communities and our small businesses, checking all the boxes. And so that is work that we are doing. And so, yeah, that's what we've done this past year. Thank you.
It's amazing. You all are both people that I watch from afar, kind of, chin on table at all the work you're doing. Heather, I'm curious, for you, what's work that feels particularly transformative and also particularly life-giving right now?
Well, I think this book is a start, because of the work that you and Ayanna have done in pulling people together, pulling women together to talk about solutions. This is the connectivity that has maintained. I look at the screen and I was like, oh yeah, I work with Leah, or, all of these connections that have come through this work. I think it is one of the best ways that we talk about doing this, because for me, the best way to describe what I do is collaborations, because the most important thing for this solution process is community. And so somebody has to be there to help to make sure that not only is the table continuing to expand, but that all the voices that are heard, particularly those that have been marginalized and have been left out for so long. So currently I work as the Climate Justice Liaison for the Environmental Defense Fund and Senior Advisor to Moms Clean Air Force, and work with a lot of the people that are in this book and that are doing policy work across the country. But I will tell you, right now in this very moment, one of the most important things, and I don't know that I come from a social justice background. My dad is a retired civil rights attorney, and so, just sort of that urgency. The biggest threat to climate policy is voter suppression. It is voter suppression. We can talk about different issues and legislation, and it's all important, but when you have Black and brown people who vote for climate policy more than anybody else, and those are the very people who are being attacked in terms of taking away the right to vote in state legislatures across this country, then it says to us, either we make sure that our people can vote or else we lose. So no environmental organization, no group, nobody can afford to allow voting rights to be taken away from any group, period. It is something we must focus on. It's the urgency right now.
It is the urgency of now, and you're in Mississippi, I'm in Georgia, we're watching it.
We're watching it.
Yeah.
We're watching it. But, we're doing something about it, because even with the state legislatures and what they're doing, in Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, and we see it, Arizona, seeing it happening everywhere. Guess what? Somebody else turned 18 today. Tomorrow, there are going to be a few more people who turn 18. Are they registered to vote? That's my concern. Let's make sure that every eligible person that we know we can influence, building upon that intergenerational movement, us as elders, and I gotta tell you, I was honored that you said, called me a matriarch. That's my goal in life, to be like on the mother's board at the Baptist church in the South, and if you know about that, you understand. But seriously, that's our role, is to make sure that our young people are registered to vote, that they are carrying this torch, and then that they know what to do with it. And so that is an urgency that allows us to really move these other pieces so that in the next 5 years, they don't have to fight as hard as we're having to fight now for common sense things.
And as you have said really poignantly, the midterms are going to be here before we know it. So
Already.
Voter registration now, right now. Elizabeth, would you leave us with a call to action?
This is a hard one. I should have thought about this in advance. There's so many. I think that if people were willing to check out New Yorker News, it's a coalition of over 300 members. We serve on the steering committee, and we're trying to pass legislation to make polluters pay. And it would be great if folks here would sign up and support that. I'd also love if you could, in your climate work, center racial justice and equity. I am with the Climate Justice Alliance, which is a national organization of frontline leaders from Puerto Rico all the way to Guam. And they are doing amazing things, whether it's the Indigenous Environmental Network, or whether it's our folks out in Oakland, or those of us who are here in Brooklyn. And so it would be great for you to find out what the work is on the ground, reject false solutions and tech fixes, and support the work that's being led by frontline leaders. So thank you.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and share about your work. And we're gonna escort ourselves off stage, and Ayana's gonna come in hot with a poem.
While we're doing a scene change here, I just want to say, Beyonce, Lizzo, if you're listening, I hope you heard what Fabiana said. We need you to build cultural power with us for the climate movement. So if you needed an invitation, you are welcome. We would be happy to hang out with you. We will learn all the words to your songs. The other thing I'm going to say to kill time is that Catherine and I didn't realize how much the title of this book would mean. Every single word in the title has such deep meaning for us. All we can save, right? It's the all, it's the collective, the we, it's the possibility and the can. It is the imperative of the save. And then the subtitle is the how, right? Truth, courage, and solutions, not like wallow, cry, and give up. So our last offering from the book for this evening this is a poem called Being Human by Naima Penniman. I wonder if the sun debates dawn some mornings, not wanting to rise out of bed from under the down feather horizon. If the sky grows tired of being everywhere at once, adapting to the mood swings of the weather. If clouds drift off, trying to hold themselves together, make deals with gravity to loiter a little longer. I wonder if rain is scared of falling, if it has trouble letting go, if snowflakes get sick of being perfect all the time. Each one trying to be one of a kind. I wonder if stars wish upon themselves before they die. If they need to teach their young how to shine, I wonder if shadows long to just for once feel the sun. If they get lost in the shuffle, not knowing where they're from, I wonder if sunrise and sunset respect each other, even though they've never met. If volcanoes get stressed, if storms have regrets, if compost believes in life after death. I wonder if breath ever thinks of suicide. If the wind just wants to sit still sometimes and watch the world pass by. If smoke was born knowing how to rise. If rainbows get shy backstage, not sure if their colors match right. I wonder if lightning sets an alarm clock to know when to crack. If rivers ever stop and think of turning back. if streams meet the wrong sea and their whole lives run off track. I wonder if the snow wants to be black. If the soil thinks she's too dark. If butterflies want to cover up their marks. If rocks are self-conscious of their weight. If mountains are insecure of their strength. I wonder if waves get discouraged crawling up on the sand only to be pulled back again to where they began. If land feels stepped upon, if sand feels insignificant, if trees need to question their lovers to know where they stand. If branches waver at the crossroads, unsure of which way to grow. If the leaves understand they're replaceable and still dance when the wind blows. I wonder where the moon goes when she's hiding. I want to find her there and watch the ocean spin from a distance, listen to her stir in her sleep. Effort give way to existence. Naima Penniman writes extremely good poems. Check her out at Climbing Poetry, TREE.
That was so good. I think this has been a good birthday.
Happy birthday, All We Can Save, this little book.
I just feel overwhelmed by you, by everyone who spoke tonight, by everyone who's here. Since we started working on this book, most of that was in the pandemic. So to be in community with this book really means a lot.
We want to thank all the speakers who have generously shared their time and wisdom tonight. To everyone who joined us in New York and LA, in Atlanta and St. Paul and online and wherever you are, thank you for being part of this celebration.
Heaps of gratitude to all the contributors whose writings make up the mighty chorus of All We Can Save. 41 essays, 17 poems, interstitial quotes, art. There would have been more, but our editor said, you're done.
It was supposed to be 20 essays. We kind of got carried away.
We are really grateful to our publisher, One World and Penguin Random House, and especially to that editor who did let us expand quite a bit, Nicole Counts.
This event tonight would not have been possible without our partner, Patagonia. We are so grateful for your support, collaboration, production, attention to detail, snacks, which Catherine knows are extremely important to me.
Snacks do get a shout out in the gratitude of the book. And of course, we also have to leave y'all with a call to action.
Of course.
This book now belongs to a community of 50,000 readers and growing. Please continue to share it with people who have been in the work a long time. They need shoring up. And share it with those who are still finding their place in climate work. We need everyone. And if you're feeling drawn to deeper dialogue and community building, form an All We Can Save reading circle. There are open source resources on our website, and people keep responding to the survey at the end that it is a transformative experience.
Our website is allwecansave.earth, which I am charmed by. The All We Can Save Project nonprofit is carrying forward the mission that gave rise to the anthology. Catherine and I went on a rage hike in the aspen groves of Colorado and started thinking about solutions. And this is where that has led. To this mission of nurturing a welcoming, connected, and leaderful climate community rooted in the work and wisdom of women. Not as something that sounds nice, but because that is the way we will succeed.
And we want to underscore that our use of the term women is always open, expansive, and inclusive of trans, non-binary, and femme folks. You may have heard us talk about what we see as a burgeoning feminist climate renaissance. Maybe not that burgeoning because Eunice was sort of on it back in the day, but that renaissance is for everyone.
And there's a lot more to come. We are trying to sort of throw away war metaphors in favor of like art and nature. So Renaissance and rebirth and the artistic movement, we want like more of that vibe in the climate space. And we know gender equality is quantitatively key to addressing the climate crisis. You should watch Catherine's TED Talk if you need someone to break that down for you. And of course, anyone of any gender can be a feminist. So stay engaged. Please sign up for our newsletter for updates as we roll out all this additional resources and programs.
Again, all on our website, allwecansave.earth. And we want to close with Audrey and Rich, whose words gave this book its title and opened the anthology. Our hearts are moved by all we cannot save. So much has been destroyed.
We have to cast our lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world.
That's the work. Good night, everyone.
Good night.